The sky above California was painted in soft hues of orange and violet as the sun began its slow descent. It was January 31st, 2000, an ordinary winter day that would soon become an unforgettable tragedy. At the Los Angeles International Airport, passengers moved with quiet purpose. Businessmen, families, and couples, each carrying stories, dreams, and destinations of their own. Flight attendants smiled, pilots nodded, and the soft hum of jet engines echoed across the terminal. Alaska Airlines Flight 261, bound for San Francisco and onward to Seattle, was preparing for departure. The McDonnell Douglas MD-83 gleamed under the fading light, a registration N963 as. For the passengers, it was just another plane. But for the two men in the cockpit, it was a machine they knew intimately. Captain Ted Thompson, a veteran with over 17,000 flight hours, sat at the controls, a calm, confident, and respected. Beside him was First Officer Bill Tansky, skilled, composed, and steady under pressure. Their teamwork was seamless, a bond forged through countless hours in the sky. At 2:09 p.m., the engines roared to life, and Flight 261 taxied toward the runway. The cabin filled with the familiar rumble of takeoff. Flight attendants gave final safety checks, passengers settled in, and the plane lifted gracefully into the sky. To those on board, it was just another flight home. But high above the Pacific coast, fate was quietly waiting. At 4:09 p.m., cruising at 31,000 feet, the pilots noticed something unusual. The horizontal stabilizer, a rather small but crucial surface that controls the airplane's pitch, wasn't responding normally. A mechanical stiffness, a hesitation in the controls. "Feels a little tight," Thompson remarked, moving the trim switches on his yoke. The plane didn't respond the way it should. Tansky nodded, checking the gauges. "Yeah, feels jammed." "You getting anything?" "No, a broken bar, it's stuck," Thompson said, a quiet tension entering his voice. "Feels like we've got a jammed stabilizer." The horizontal stabilizer trim system, controlled by a jack screw mechanism deep in the tail, was the heart of the plane's pitch control. A single screw, threads turning within a nut assembly, adjusted the angle of the stabilizer. It was precise engineering, but also a single point of failure. In the cabin, everything seemed calm. Passengers read magazines, sipped drinks, or watched the clouds pass by. The ocean stretched endlessly below, peaceful and still. No one could imagine that beneath the calm surface, the very mechanism that kept them aloft was wearing itself apart. The pilots contacted Alaskan Airlines Maintenance Control. The call was routine at first, a technical discussion between professionals. "Alaska Maintenance, 261. We've got a jammed stabilizer here," the voice on the other end replied. "Copy that, 261. "Can you trim manually?" "Negative," said Tansky. "It's locked solid." "Okay, we'll look into it." "Try cycling it slowly." They tried again. Nothing. The trim wheels beside their knees barely moved. Thompson's hand gripped the control column tightly. He knew what that meant. The airplane's nose pitch was locked. They could still fly, but any sudden change could be catastrophic. At 4:20 p.m., they decided to descend slightly and troubleshoot. "Let's go down to 28,000, Thompson said, his voice steady. The descent was smooth at first. Passengers barely noticed anything unusual. But then, a sudden shudder ran through the aircraft. "Whoa," Thompson said, pulling back gently. The plane responded sluggishly, nose dipping slightly. "She's trying to pitch down." The jack screw, the threaded shaft responsible for moving the stabilizer ray, was grinding against its worn nut. For months, its threads had been deteriorating, each flight wearing it thinner. Improper maintenance and lack of lubrication had turned that vital part into a silent time bomb. As the pilots worked the problem, the cockpit filled with the sound of alarms. The autopilot disengaged with a sharp click. The plane dipped again. "Got it," Thompson said, pulling back hard. "You with me?" "Yeah, I got you," replied Tansky, gripping his controls. For the next several minutes, they fought the airplane, trimming, adjusting, coordinating with air traffic control. The voice of calm professionalism never wavered, even as the situation worsened. At 4:35 p.m., Flight 261 requested a block altitude to troubleshoot further. "We're having a flight control problem," Thompson explained over the radio. "We'd like to stay between 20 and 25,000 feet if possible." Controllers cleared them without hesitation. The calmness of the pilot's voice belied the storm inside the cockpit. In the cabin, a few passengers began to notice something was wrong. The plane's gentle pitch changes, the murmurs from the flight attendants, the uneasy glances exchanged, all small signs of a growing problem. "Everything okay up there?" one attendant asked over the interphone. "We're working a little problem," came the captain's reassuring voice. "Nothing to worry about. Just stay seated for now." But in truth, both men knew the problem could turn fatal. Thompson and Tansky reviewed every possible checklist. Nothing addressed a jammed stabilizer in flight. They considered using the trim cutout switches, but the mechanical issue wasn't electrical. The stabilizer simply wouldn't move. Then, at 4:40 p.m., something changed. The plane suddenly pitched down sharply and violently. "Pull it up!" shouted Tansky. "I'm trying." Thompson grunted, both hands on the control yoke. The plane dove, the nose dropping toward the ocean below. Alarms blared, G-forces pressed against their bodies, and the MD-83 screamed through the air. "Mayday, Mayday, Alaska 261, we're in a dive." Controllers heard the desperate transmission. "Alaska 261, say again." The jet plummeted thousands of feet before the pilots managed to pull it back. The aircraft leveled barely. Silence filled the cockpit except for the heavy breathing of two men who had just stared death in the face. "Okay," Thompson said softly. "We got it back. Let's keep it slow." They stabilized at around 24,000 feet. Passengers gasped, shaken but alive. Some prayed quietly, others held hands. Flight attendants tried to smile, even as fear shadowed their faces. "Let's try manual trim one more time," Tansky suggested. They turned the trim wheel. For a moment, it felt like movement. Then a sudden, hollow snap. The jack screw assembly had failed completely. "Whoa, something broke!" Thompson shouted. The stabilizer, now disconnected from its control mechanism, moved freely and unpredictably. The nose pitched violently downward again. The cockpit voice recorder captured their final moments. Voices calm but strained, desperate but professional. "Here we go again," Thompson yelled, as the plane inverted upside down, plummeting toward the ocean. "Push and roll," shouted Tansky. "I can't pull it out." The MD-83 rolled completely inverted, nose down, nearly vertical. Passengers screamed. Objects flew across the cabin. The world turned upside down, literally. "Just keep it together," Thompson said, still fighting. "Speed's coming up." We're out of control." The ocean raced toward them, the altimeter unwinding. Goda. At 4:21 p.m. Pacific Time, Alaska Airlines Flight 261 slammed into the Pacific Ocean off the coast of California at over 400 miles per hour. The impact was instant. 188 souls were gone. The radar blip disappeared from controllers' screens. Moments later, silence. Rescue helicopters were dispatched immediately, but when they arrived, there was nothing left, just scattered debris and the fading smell of jet fuel. The Pacific, vast and merciless, had swallowed an entire aircraft in seconds. The following day, divers located the wreckage on the seafloor. Among the twisted metal, investigators recovered the jack screw assembly. What they found confirmed the pilot's worst fears. The Acme nut threads at the very heart of the stabilizer control were completely stripped. Years of insufficient lubrication and maintenance oversight had worn the metal down until it failed entirely. The tragedy wasn't caused by weather, nor by pilot error. It was a failure of systems, both mechanical and human. A failure of oversight, of responsibility. The cockpit voice recorder painted a haunting portrait of courage. In their final minutes, Captain Thompson and First Officer Tansky fought with everything they had. Calm, skilled, and utterly professional, they never gave up. Even as the plane inverted and the ocean rushed up to meet them, their voices never turned to panic. Only focus. Only duty. We're inverted. Whoa, laughter, and then silence. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation that followed was one of the most thorough in aviation history. The worn jack screw, they found, had not been properly lubricated according to maintenance schedules. The oversight went unnoticed through multiple inspections. A simple Acta tube of grease applied regularly could have saved 88 lives. Families gathered on the shores near Port Hueneme, watching the waves that had claimed their loved ones. Flowers floated on the surface of the sea. A mother wept as the tide touched her feet. A husband clutched his wife's photograph, his eyes empty. News crews reported relentlessly, but behind every headline were real people, ordinary souls who had simply boarded a flight home. In the months that followed, Alaska Airlines faced deep scrutiny. Maintenance records were examined line by line. The far-revised inspection procedures for all MD-80 series aircraft. The aviation industry was reminded once again that even the smallest part, a thread of metal, could hold the weight of hundreds of lives. But beyond the investigation and policy changes, the story of Alaska 261 remained deeply human. It was the story of two pilots who refused to surrender, who fought physics itself in their final seconds to give their passengers a chance. In the end, they had no chance. But they gave everything. Years later, those who listened to the cockpit recordings described them as some of the most haunting in aviation history, not because of panic, but because of courage. Calm voices, technical precision, and the steady tone of men who knew they were out of options, yet continued to try. The final transmission from Flight 261, captured moments before impact, still echoes through time, a simple, human sound in the face of disaster. Here we go, and then nothing. The Pacific Ocean holds no monuments, but somewhere beneath its endless blue rests the memory of that flight, Alaska 261A, and the souls who never made it home. Today, when pilots train in simulators, they study the tragedy of Flight 261 not as just an accident, but as a lesson written in courage and sacrifice. Every system check, every maintenance log, every inspection now carries a weight born from that day, because every bolt, every thread, every decision matters. When an aircraft lifts off into the sky, it carries not just passengers but trust. The trust that every part has been cared for, that every detail has been seen. Trust that the men and women behind it all, from the engineers to the pilots, have done their part. On January 31, 2000, that trust was broken, but from its ashes came change. Today, the name Alaska Airlines 261 is spoken with reverence, not as a headline of tragedy, but as a reminder of humanity's resilience. As the sun sets each evening over the Pacific, the golden light touches the waves where that jet once fell. Somewhere in the quiet wind, the echoes of that final flight whisper through time, a story of courage, loss, and the fragile beauty of flight. A flight against time, forever remembered.